Welcome to A Woman's Brew, where women talk about beer. In today's episode, we're brewing up an insightful conversation about home brewing. I'm Joanne, and this is Tori.
Hello, hello.
And we're two beer-loving women on a mission to get more people drinking and talking about great beer. Come join us.
Well, so today's topic obviously is home brewing. Obviously, we're going to throw in a bit about commercial brewing sort of towards the end of the conversation for reasons that will become obvious when we get to it. But not to date it for anyone that's seen Instagram stories or anything, a few weeks ago, recently, let's just say recently,
yeah.
I came to visit you, stayed at your house and homebrewed with you.
Yep.
And that was my first time homebrewing. Obviously you are a seasoned veteran of homebrewing. So, I jotted down some stuff that I observed while we were, brewing. I asked a whole bunch of questions while we were there. Probably should have recorded that because that some of the stuff I asked probably would have been useful for now. Yeah. And I can't remember now that I'm not in the moment of it. But I did put out questions, and we both put out sort of feelers out to see if there's any questions that people might have had about home brewing, which we'll get to towards the end of the episode. But yeah, I just thought, myself having questions, I'm sure there's other people that even if you don't intend on home brewing yourself, you might just have mild curiosities about it, and thought it would just make a really good and interesting episode to talk about home brewing, because you either have podcasts that talk about home brewing or talk about breweries and just commercial level beers, and you don't really have things that dip in between. So I thought this might be a good opportunity for that. So,
and it is quite useful to know about the brewing process and ingredients and things like that, even if you're just a beer taster, because knowing those things helps you understand what's in your glass. So
and I think that there's something that from my end as a person that hadn't done it themselves, and again, more will come, we get to the commercial side of things as well. For me, I always think that it gives people, it should give people almost a new appreciation for brewing, because I think there's a lot of stuff that you don't necessarily think of just from a consumer perspective, but when you're actually hands-on in the process and you see how the process is done, you can get a whole new appreciation for it. So hopefully this episode will be insightful for people, and yeah, let's do our best, or you can do your best. I'll read the questions. Today it's going to be more kind of normally
I can.
Yeah, normally we interview somebody from a brewery or whatever. This episode, it's I'm interviewing. We either talk about things together or we're interviewing someone together. But today I'm interviewing you. It's you're the guest today.
Cool, but I've still got to do my own editing. So
yeah, that's true. No, can you imagine if we had guests on and we're you edit now?
You edit.
It's your turn.
Right. This is right. So
Bars and flaws. We could have said you guys edit it. You do the editing now.
Let's circle back to commercial brewing, and when you do a collaboration with someone, if you are the collabing person, it's your job to clean out the mash tun. So when we, I feel
when you're the guest on the pod, it's your turn to edit the pod.
Right. I feel maybe it's your turn to edit the podcast.
I don't know, because I feel it's even better. I've said I'd definitely try helping you with editing, but you were no, it's fine. I feel you know what you want out of the editing process. You have it down to a T. I would love someone to volunteer and say, I'll edit it for you, and you'd be no, it's just fine.
Fine. I know what I want, thanks.
But to crack off this episode, I've got one of your home brews. You've obviously got one of your home brews. What home brew do you have? Because I've got your pumpkin one. Not to date it, it is a time of year when you would enjoy pumpkin beers.
And I've got my Vienna lager. And I have an appropriate tankard to put it in. So
I went with my Teku that says on Tuesdays we drink tippers. I'm not drinking a tipper, and it's not Tuesday, which should tell you the type of week that I am having. So before I open this, is there any advice on how to open this? I've opened these before, but for anybody else that might be getting someone else's homebrew.
So they can sometimes be a bit lively because obviously they're not filtered or anything like that. It's difficult to judge carbonation levels in them. So it is wise to carefully open them. Also, if someone has recently transported them, that's going to shaken it up a little bit. So you do need to just be a bit careful sometimes when you're opening people's home brews. Mine just get a little bit lively sometimes.
I've got
so
kitchen roll out ready to go
yeah.
actually. So I'm gonna just do that.
Oh, mine was okay.
Okay, this one was all right. This one was definitely all right.
Yeah, my Vienna lager's got medium carbonation, so.
Oh, let's listen to that ASMR. Brewery ASMR.
Brewery ASMR. And also with home brews, you may get some sediment in the bottom, so just be aware of that when you're pouring it.
Look at this pumpkin beer. I don't think this is your pumpkin double. I think this is just your.
Is that the ale?
I think it's just the ale. I think I accidentally drank your pumpkin double and I thought it was something else. And when I opened the bottle and poured it, I realized right away from the color that it was not. I thought it was your saison. It was not your saison because I emptied it and I went, oh, and then I smelled it and I went, that's pumpkin spice. I was very happy. It just was not what I was expecting to come out. Smelling this now as well. It smells gorgeous and pumpkin spice and beautiful. So to kick things off, cheers, Jo.
Cheers.
I will also highlight, like, obviously this bottle is from, there's going to be a question sort of related to this later, but this bottle is from a year ago when you made it last year, and actually it's still, I don't know if it's just because pumpkin spice and the way that
it depends on the bit, on the style,
as well, but it's kept like fairly well. Like I can still get, it's a bit thinner than it was when I had it last year, but like there's still enough spice to it that it's held up pretty well. So well done.
Good.
So to start things off, I thought it might be interesting if you just kind of give us a bit of sort of your journey into homebrewing, because obviously we know you've done it quite a bit now, but from what got you interested to the process of you starting your first few brews, walk us through that.
So I liked beer and I knew that you could brew it. I knew that you could brew it yourself. Brewing's like cooking. If you know the ingredients and you know the times, then you can do it yourself. Obviously you need the right kit, but there is a big home brewing movement. There's lots of information out there. There are books, there's YouTube videos, there's blogs and posts and things like that online you can find that will help you learn how to do it. At the time when I started, I was just like, do you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm going to give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? And really, as long as you are sanitizing everything and being careful about it, you can pretty much make drinkable beer without much problem. You know, it may not be world-class beer, but it will be drinkable. I was living in a one-bedroom flat at the time, so I wanted something that was small. So I did a little bit of research and I was like, you know, what small scale home brewing setups can you get? So I got this kit from a website called brewuk.co.uk. And you can get starter kits that have a chunk of the equipment that you need in them, and then you can get refill kits with different recipes in. So my first one was a vanilla porter.
I'm looking up. People see on the video I'm typing. It's because I'm looking it up now. I'm just curious to kind of see the website.
But in the kit, so often, when you buy like a home brewing kit, often you will have in it malt extract as opposed to actual grains. These stovetopper kits are what's called all grain. So you are, just as a commercial brewery or a craft brewery, you are using a mix of actual grains. It's called the grist once you crushed it and you're actually using it. But you're using 100% grains in your beer. Whereas often, if you're getting a home brewing kit, you get something called malt extract, and it either comes in a powder and you make it up, or it comes in like a tin and it's like a syrup, and that replaces a portion of your grains. I had to work out what that was because when I got my stovetopper kit, it was all grains. So I was just like, yeah, you know, as the stuff that I knew about brewing was that you use grains. So I was like, cool, this is how you do it. And then I would be reading recipes online and it'd be talking about malt extract. I'm like, I don't know what that is. And often when people talk to you and they're like, oh, you started in home brewing, started with malt extract, yeah. And I was like, no. I've done all grain all the time. Because really,
I was gonna say it's right on here as well. Or
Yeah,
the
all
first
grain.
one of the things that pops up is all grain brewing. It says malt, hops, recipe packs.
Right. So you're just like, that's what goes into a beer: malt, hops, yeast, water. So that's what I was expecting. So I had to work out what that was. But that can be more simple to start with, because that malt extract can be all of your malt. It can already have hops added to it, and you just chuck that in and boil it, and off you go. So it can be very simple. I like using all grain because you've got a bit more control over what goes in. You do, the more complex your recipes get, the more different types of malt you're going to need. And depending on the size of your kit, the amount you'll need will change. So you can end up with bags, you only need like a tiny portion of something, or some of like the specialty grains that you only need to add a little bit in to get like color or a little bit of flavor from. So you can end up with bags kind of sitting around for a while. So it depends on how you want to do that, whether you've got storage space, whether you don't necessarily want to faff around with that. That's a choice you need to make when you're starting brewing. But so that's the kit I started with, and it came with, if I can remember correctly, it came with a glass demijohn, which is what you fermented in. It came with a thermometer. It came with the grains and the hops and the yeast. And it came with a plastic tube and a little clip, and it came with the airlock. So when you ferment your beer, you need to like seal it in. So there's like a rubber bung that goes in the top of whatever you're fermenting in, and then inside is either a little plastic thing that goes up and down, or it looks like a coil with bubbles in it, and you put sanitizer in there, and then when the yeast is fermenting, it creates carbon dioxide, and that will go up through the airlock and it will bubble, and then it's fermenting. So there was one of those in there as well. It said as well, you'll need a pot and a sieve. And I was like, cool, pot and a sieve. I've got a sieve in the kitchen. I've got, I'll just get, a big-ish soup pot. First pot I got was not big enough. Like
I'll just grab a big-ish soup pot.
I'll just grab a big-ish soup pot. That'll work. So you really need to think about
roughly how big is big-ish. If you were to say, like,
the big soup pot is the medium one that I used when we were brewing. So it's about half the size of the actual one that I use now. So it's probably about 5 liters. Because it's like, because you make.
Was that the one that, just for no one's gonna know besides me, because obviously I was there. Yeah. Sorry, guys. Was that the one that was like, we were doing the sparge over, not the 2 actual pans
not the
that
2
we used. It was was your big-ish pot.
That was my big pot. because I was making,
it was about, for people watching the video, it was
it was 5 litre. It was a 5 litre. It's about a 5 litre soup pot. So where the kit says you are going to make 5 litres of beer, I was like, cool, I'll get a 5 litre pot. You don't actually, and you end up with 5 litres, but you need more than that, because some's going to boil off, you're going to spill some, the grains are going to soak some up. So actually, really, you end up needing about 9 to 10 litres to make a 5 litre batch. So I was wrong on that. And when I was like, just need a sieve. I've got a big kitchen sieve. My big kitchen sieve was not big enough. So the first time I did it, I ended up with like saucepans everywhere with various amounts of water in and wort and everything else. I sparged, so you take the grains out of the water and then rinse them with more water. I ended up with grain everywhere. It was great. But I got a demijohn full of beer eventually.
You eventually got there.
Eventually I got there, and I was just like, next time I do this, I need a bigger pot.
I feel like I'm stressed out just hearing about this.
It's great.
I like the idea of having to split your wort between like all these different pot. Like I'd be like, oh my god, what if it's not the right amount in one pot? Like I would be having an absolute panic at that.
What I was more concerned about was because in this kit also you got sanitizer. So it's really important that anything that's going to touch the wort /beer is sanitized, because the more things that touch it, the more chance you've got of infecting it and completely wrecking your batch of beer. So I'm fanatical about it. Like, cleaning is very, very important. I sanitize everything from start to finish, just in case. And so I did all of that, and then because it was a vanilla porter, I had to add a vanilla pod about a week into fermentation. So then I was like, what do I do
second
with
set of
this?
panic.
Right, because then I was just like, oh my god, what if I put this vanilla pod in and it contaminates the entire thing with something gross?
Well, then how do you you couldn't like sanitize a vanilla pod though, would you?
No. I mean, this was in a sealed packet. You then just had to split it open and chuck it in. So I split it open with a sanitized knife and poked it in. But how I've learned to do it now is that you dose it with a little bit of vodka and then you chuck it in.
That's smart, because that's like
because the vodka doesn't really add anything, because you're just kind of cleaning it, but it doesn't take away from the actual flavors. I've also added like spices to a beer. You can add them during the boil, but sometimes fermentation will get rid of some of that spice flavor and aroma. So you might want to add some more just before you're bottling. And I will make a tincture. So that's spices soaked in vodka. And then you strain out the bits, and then you add that flavored vodka to the beer to get a bit more of the spices. You only add a little bit, so it doesn't really mess with the alcohol levels. But then that's how you add, because then it's all sanitized and
isn't like a natural sanitizer right there.
Yeah. So I learned that. The next thing that I had with it was, you've then got to get the beer out of the demijohn into bottles, and they gave you a plastic tube, and you're like, that's cool. This is going to be really easy. And so the instructions are, you stick it in the demijohn, and then you use gravity to pull it down into the bottles. I had so much trouble trying to get it out of the demijohn just with this tube into the bottles. I ended up with it like stacked on various things to get it really high and then try and get it out.
Was it just that it wasn't high enough up for that?
Yeah, and you actually, what as well you really could do with is what's called an auto siphon, which is what I use when I'm bottling now, because you pump it and it sucks it up.
Yeah.
And then does it. I still have, when I'm bottling, I still have my demijohn up on a step on the table and a bottle on the floor. But because you're doing that original pull, it then goes through it, and that just starts the gravity process. So as you are home brewing, you can just do it with a pot, 2 pots and a sieve. But really, you will begin to invest in other bits that just make your life a bit easier.
So you obviously got the demijohn bit of it, and I'm going to try something for the first time here that we've never done before. I'm going to try to share my screen. You got that kit that was like the all grain kit.
Yeah.
I haven't actually got a kit, but a friend of mine was, bought this kit, tried brewing something once. The cleaning was a lot. I think they tried to make a cider. It maybe didn't come out very great. And they were kind of like, oh, I don't really want this anymore. So they sort of handed it off to me, knowing like I've got an interest in beer. I hadn't actually got around to brewing with it because I really wanted to have like hands-on experience before trying it on my own, just because of my anxiety levels. Right. So the kit that I've got, I was just, only because it flagged like on the website that you went to. If people see me typing, it's because I'm looking up the things that you're talking about, because I think it's interesting. Let's see if this works.
Ta-da!
Hey, this is the type of kit that I've got.
You got the plastic bucket.
Yes. And like the
oh yeah, I think I got a spoon
situation
in mine as well. I bought my spoon. I bought Wilko's. Top tip: Wilko's does a great range of quick to get home brewing stuff.
So, I was gonna say I've heard that Wilko's do good ones before.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure if you can see the all grain starter kits. Let's see what that looks like. See if we can find, for anyone curious.
That's it. That's the stove topper there. That's what I bought. Yeah.
Let's see if we can see what's in it.
Hey, so that's literally all you got.
That's a demijohn.
That's my demijohn. Yeah, with the stick stuck on.
There's your
temperature gauge. thermometer.
Grains and bits, your
Yeah,
tube.
and that's it. You literally got a tube.
Oh, that is what you were describing.
That is, that's the airlock. So
airlock.
it is a plastic squiggly thing.
I think you described it pretty well, to be fair. But yeah, I'll stop sharing now for the time being anyways. Hopefully that came up on the recording, and because that's quite interesting for anyone watching the video. If you've not watched the video, sorry, that was not relevant to you at all. So I did what I could. But perusing that site as well, what I saw, just to deviate slightly, what I thought was quite interesting as well was there was like wet yeast, I think.
Yes.
It's like liquid yeast.
Yeah.
And it's called yeast.
Why yeast?
Why yeast?
Yeah.
Yeast.
So that's the company that produces the yeast. So usually, often you'll get a little packet like this I'm showing on the video. It is literally like a little sealed packet, and it's got, like, if you were buying yeast to make bread with, this is brewer's yeast, and this will come in different strains depending on what you're making. This one here I got in my hop subscription because I'm that kind of home brewer. And this is actually a lager yeast. You do need to make sure that you use the right yeast for the beer style that you're trying to make, because that will make a difference. And so in there, that's a dried powder, just like if you were trying to make bread. You can get wet liquid yeast. It's more expensive because it's already started. So what you do with this powdered one, you can just sometimes sprinkle it in, but to get the best effect, you're usually better adding a bit of warm water to it and letting it start to kind of bubble up and so the yeast cells double and increase. And so you want to start it doing that before you add it to the beer, and then you'll put it in the beer and it's like, oh, yummy sugars. And then it creates your alcohol and your carbon dioxide. You can get the wet ones that are already done like that, and then you just pitch is the word for adding your yeast. You pitch your yeast, so you just pitch the wet ones straight in. I don't use those, one, because they're more expensive, and two, because I only do 5 litres at a time. A packet like this is really meant for about 20 litres. That will do you a 20 litre batch. So I generally use about half a packet of that, really. So a wet one, once you open it, you kind of got to use it. So
all of it, I guess.
Yeah. So I wouldn't really use those. They are apparently very good yeasts, though.
Once you maybe I'm jumping ahead because obviously we're still kind of in the entry level of this conversation, but it seems relevant at the moment. Can you add too much? Is there a point of you're adding too much yeast? Or if you used a whole packet of the wet yeast, for example, how badly would that, if it wasn't something that was meant to have all of it and you put it all in, would that massively screw things up? Or I
don't necessarily think, I think you can put too much in and it can go a little bit too much. It could eat all, for a style that doesn't necessarily need all of the sugars eaten, it could eat everything, and then you've got a drier beer than you wanted. There are, when you really get into the science of it, there's pitch rates that you can sort out and stuff. As an entry level home brewer, use the amount of yeast that you're told to.
just stick with the directions.
I have had it where I felt that it hasn't done enough and I've added a bit more yeast, because I feel like the yeast hasn't done what it's supposed to, so I've chucked a bit more in. But
it's like we say, know the rules to break it. So follow the rules first, so you know what you're supposed to do. But that's interesting, because like I said, I wasn't sure if it necessarily would screw, but it sounds like the worst case scenario is it might end up with a slightly different taste, but not undrinkable.
I don't think so. There may be some implications to that, but I'm not aware of them and I've never done it. So
fair.
Someone who is more experienced in yeast can let us know.
Yeah, let us know. Feel free to comment on the YouTube.
You can also
put it on Instagram.
Save your yeast. It is possible to do that. And then you keep it in the fridge and you can reuse it. I think with the packet, with the dried yeast, that's more difficult to do because you need so many yeast cells for it to then start back up again easily. And the dried ones aren't as easy to do that with. But there are ways of doing that if you wanted to. And I've heard of some people who have taken the yeast from like a smoked beer that they've made and used
wow.
it in a batch that doesn't necessarily use smoked malt to see if that adds to it. Like there's different experiments you can do, and you can try and cultivate yeast from a beer bottle. You just kind of have to feed it and hope that it multiplies.
That's incredibly interesting. I feel like that could be a whole separate topic in itself, to
Yeah.
be fair. Like there's so many additional questions I feel like I'd have off the back of that, but I will hold
Yeast is a
back
whole
from
thing. Like
asking.
there's literally like a repository that has hundreds of yeast strains in it in like London somewhere, and they've got old yeast strains from closed breweries, and brewers can go and request to have like a bit of yeast from there, and they can
So crazy.
try and recreate it and use it in their beers.
I wonder how much it costs to get like a really old yeast strain.
Because I can't remember which brewery it was, but there was a brewery around, I think it was in Kent, that had closed, and then they tried to whoever bought the land, or whether it was the family later on, decided to reopen it, and they went and got the yeast strain that had been saved from the brewery to reuse it.
That's incredible. And isn't the one that's behind you, the shipwrecked one, isn't that using yeast from like a shipwreck?
Yeah, so this beer, this uses yeast that's about 200 years old. So they found bottles of beer in the shipwreck, and then they propagated the yeast in the bottle and managed to create enough yeast that they could make a beer out of it.
Science is fucking weird.
It's amazing,
it's weird. It is. I love science, but
this was a special beer that my friend sent me over from Australia. But Darwin Brewery, who brew in Sunderland, do a beer that uses yeast that was from a shipwreck. So if you're interested in something like that, have a look up of Darwin Brewery.
I'm definitely interested in that. I feel like, we need a whole separate conversation on yeast, I think. But before I close out the Brew UK website, the other thing that's worth pointing out as well, like you were saying with these kits, and I mean, not only can you get these kits that are just here's a particular style, I mean, they've got all ranges of styles as well. They've got like Kolsch's, Ambers, like all different if you can think of it, there's a beer de garde, like all different types of kits you can get, but also there's a lot of kits that are for specific breweries and specific brewery beers, which is something that if you're not aware of it, that is the thing. There's a lot that are more like traditional styles of traditional breweries. I mean, you've got like your Fullers, you've got your Adnams, you've got all that kind of stuff, but also like scrolling through, I can see there's a kit for Loose Lips from that was the Yeasty Boys one. I didn't expect that to be on there. That was interesting. I mean, I know there's like the Brewdog ones and stuff like that, which I mean, that's always kind of been out there and they've put their recipes out there. So not as surprised with that, but the Yeasty Boys one, I thought particularly interesting. I mean, there's a Colonel Brewery, double Citra IPA kit that you can get. Again, didn't really expect that. There's a vanilla porter on here. I would hazard a guess that's maybe
I think that's the one that I did.
Similar to the one that you have. There's a honey porter. That sounds gorgeous.
I only did 2 kits. So my second kit was a chocolate milk stout that I brewed for our wedding, which was lovely. That worked out quite well. And then after that, I was just like, well, I reckon I could do this myself. So I did.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, that sounds literally. There's one that's here called Wreck the Holes. Nice. Which is an amazing name. And it says a special festive beer, which is a strong malty dark with subtle Christmas spices. That sounds incredible. Now I'm going to close these windows down because they're also showing me a kegerator and I don't want to get tempted. Not that I can afford it, but I'm closing it because I don't even want the temptation. But there was also something I drive by on my way to work, a homebrew shop that I didn't know was there in Farnborough, and it's called the Homebrew Shop. And I walked by and I drove by and I sort of looked over one day when I was stuck in traffic and I was like, so it'd be quite interesting to see like what I can get there, and maybe I can find something interesting to start there. So,
and if you have got a homebrew shop near you, please support them, because we had, I think, only about 2 in Kent, and I think they've both closed. So if you want to go and kind of peruse things or chat to someone that knows, because generally someone that's running a homebrew store is going to have some knowledge that you can pick up on. We haven't got any near us now, so I have to order everything online and just work it out.
I mean, when it comes to sort of, there's some questions that I think we had submitted. Lisa put a whole bunch of questions that are actually relevant to you starting up that I'll ask you in a minute. But in regards to the using websites or using your local homebrew shop, like what type of websites should people be, if they are absolutely clueless on where to go, what sort of websites can they be going on if they don't have a shop near them?
So the Malt Miller is a really good place to look at. Get Brewed is very good as well. Those are the two that I use. And Brew UK. Pretty much you could just Google homebrew supplies and you'll find stuff. But I've had very good service from both of those. They usually have what I want. And there's another one I use called the Homebrew Company. That's where I've got like some good deals on bottles. Now I tend to use bottles and I tend to use like the Grolsch type swing tops, because you can then just stick them in the dishwasher and reuse them, assuming you get them back from people.
I always send them back.
You do, yeah.
I'm good.
Most people that I do are very good and send them back to me.
I'm very polite. I clean them for you and everything.
You do. These are 500 ml. I also have 330 ml for anything that I want smaller portions of. Usually a stout or higher ABV stout, or if I want to distribute it to more people, because my kit makes between 6 to 9 pints depending on what other ingredients are in it and are sucking out the liquid. But I can make about 11 to 15 330 ml depending on what there is, so that works out quite nicely. You can just get plain bottles and crown cap them, or you can keg it. Depends on what you want to do. I've always done swing top bottles.
I imagine kegging it kind of comes with its own challenge though, because if you're wanting to get more experimental and you wanted to try a lot more, I imagine that kegging it probably comes with more of a time limit on it, I would maybe guess, because I mean, you'd also probably have to factor in, I guess, I would again assume you'd need gas of some sort to sort of to have that keg function. But I mean, I don't know what are the things to consider when you're deciding if you want to do bottles versus keg.
I think it depends on how much you're going to make. So, you know, kegs are gonna, you need to really fill a keg, because if you leave any space, you're gonna get oxygen in it and that's going to ruin your beer. So you do need to make enough to fill it. You need to think about how you're going to distribute, you know, how are you going to pour it and serve it to people. If, you know, you're just going to drink it at your house, then you can have it in a keg. But if you want to get it a bit further afield, then you may want a bottle. You can, of course, draw off of the keg into a bottle, but then again, you are risking oxidation. Space with where you're going to put it, how you're going to, if you've got a keg of it, how you're going to chill it if you want it chilled. And
which I will say, if people are interested in having kegs, I have seen some really cool DIY tutorials on like if you've got a spare fridge knocking about, as most do. I mean, there was just this really cool thing that you could do. It's more American style fridge than UK style fridge in many ways, where it was like the fridge on the bottom and the freezer on the top. But my experience over here has always kind of been freezer towards the bottom, fridge on the top. But I've seen a lot of people turn those fridges into basically kegerators, just drilling holes, putting the tray on for it, putting the tap handles on there. But then obviously they've needed the CO2 for it and everything. I'm assuming, am I wrong to assume that if you're kegging it, you're always going to need a CO2, or are there ways to do it without a CO2?
I mean, you could technically be casking it and then just having it come off via gravity. So not necessarily.
That's fair. I think, to be fair, because I know you can buy kegs from breweries that are already like sort of pre-kegged, but I have heard that to keep it longer, it's more ideal to get the tap handle that you can put like the little CO2 canisters on, because I've heard that actually helps it last.
Those are supposed to last 9 days, a week maybe, if you keep it, if you keep closing the thing and that, because there's like a little bit that you open that allows the gravity tap to work at the top. Don't know the science behind it, as you can tell, but as long as you close that again so that there's not oxygen getting into it, it will last a little bit longer. But yeah, I think as well with kegs and stuff, it's good to purge them with CO2, so there's no oxygen in there. I'm still very much in bottles, and very, very simple setup is mine.
To be fair though, I think like with the purpose of your brewing, like you don't necessarily need a keg in that sense. It's not like you're sitting there going like, yeah, I'm going to drink all of this one.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
One thing.
And like, because it's such a small setup,
and you share it.
Yeah, and I share it around with people.
Yes, I'm very grateful for that. So like kind of one of the first questions that were thrown there, we'll have a Q&A session at the end, but one of the first questions that was thrown out that feels relevant to this topic was kind of we kind of covered it, but what are the absolute basics that you need to get started?
You need a vessel to be able to ferment in and an airlock. You need at least one very big pot. I have two now because
not
I
just
have
biggish.
Not biggish, big pot. I have two now. One is what I use as my mash tun, and then while the mash is going on, I've got another one with my hot liquor, which is basically hot water that you run through the grains, going with that on as well, because otherwise you've got to find a way to heat up that water. I mean, you could do it in an urn if you've got an urn. I know some people have got the all-in-one systems, and then maybe they've got a second one of those where they heat the water up and then run it through. So like an all-in-one system, it will have like a temperature control on it, and you can do the whole thing in the one. They kind of look like big tea urns. Some of them have heating in them. Sometimes you have to put them on top of like a heat ring. But you need at least one brewing vessel, something to ferment in, and an airlock, a sieve, or you can do what they call in the bag, and you put all your grains in like a massive tea bag and steep it, and then you pull the whole thing out. So in that case, you wouldn't necessarily sparge. You would have all the water in there to begin with, and then just steep it all in there, and then just take it all out and let it drain. And then that's the
idea of that stuff. Being like a big old
brew in the bag,
grainy tea bag. Yeah. It's just really funny to me for some reason.
So you can do it like that. You'll need a thermometer. You must have a thermometer. You must have some way of sanitizing. You're gonna need a spoon, if not a mash paddle. I think that's it. Really, you can have minimal equipment, but as you go along, there will just be things you'll need. Some way of getting the beer out of the demijohn into your serving way,
in a way that can be sanitized,
bottle, whatever. Yeah.
So could somebody like just have a funnel that they sanitize and put in a bottle and dump a jug in? I mean,
you could do. The more you move it like that, so as it ferments, all of the yeast and proteins and hot particles will settle to the bottom. So the reason for using like an auto siphon or a tube and gravity is that you are sucking it off of that and not taking that into the beer. You start tipping that demijohn, all of that trub, as it is called, is going to start mixing back into your beer and end up in the bottle, and you don't really want that. So you want a more gentle way of getting it out. That can be just a tube.
That's fair. And I guess like if someone was really, really interested but on a massive budget, and when it comes to the fermentation vessel, like, that would be, your demijohn, right? Yeah. So you could get old like, Rosie's big cider jug and just chuck it.
Yeah.
Chuck out the cider if you don't want it. Or
another
drink
way is to have a plastic bucket, and then it's got a tap at the bottom.
Exactly like what I shared on the screen earlier, yeah. Assuming
so then there's a tap on the bottom, and you can turn the tap, and that will draw the liquid off of the trub and leave that, because the tap's slightly higher up than where your trub is, and so then that will draw it off. You can do it that way. I just like a glass demijohn because I can see what's going on inside the beer.
Well, I guess that's important to mention, isn't it? Is like kind of once the lid's on there, you don't really
you don't want to be able
to expose it. So if you're doing it in something clear, I guess you've got more, like you said, you can see it, you can see how it's coming along, you can see if something looks not right, or if it's in something that's like a plastic container.
Well, a lot of people use plastic buckets with a lid on and a tap. Lots of people use those. So
definitely, but I imagine that's a bit more You just have to kind of put your faith that it's going
Yeah.
all right because you can't see it. Is there any type of material that just isn't going to work?
Anything that's porous, because you're gonna get some level of oxygen in, like plastic and I mean you can use stainless steel as well. That's what breweries do. um Something that's not going to add a flavor to your beer, something that's easily cleaned, something that's not porous and not going to let oxygen in.
Perfect. Yeah, so next question is, I guess this is sort of more or less an obvious, but where's the best place to set up home brewing in your house or to conduct it? Obviously, an ideal setup, it's probably going to be in your kitchen, but I guess if we consider where's the most ideal place to do it and where's the best place to sort of leave it to ferment.
So to brew, you're going to need a heat source. So whether you're doing that outside and you've got electrics that you can plug something into, or whether you're doing that in your kitchen because you've got the heat source there, and you're going to need a water supply because brewing uses a lot of water, not just in the beer itself, but in the cleaning, because like everyone says that brewing is 90% cleaning, but it really is.
It is.
It really
I witnessed it. It really is.
So you need a water source, you need a heat source, whether that's out in the garden, in your shed, in your garage, in the kitchen. Those are the kind of places, but you need those two things. And then for fermenting, depends on what beer you're making, what your yeast is, but you kind of need it to stay at a consistent temperature for that yeast. So I don't actually have temperature control. A lot of brewers will have made up like a fridge that they can check the temperature on, or they'll have some way of cooling or warming it so that it's at the right temperature. My living room in a quiet corner sits at about 22 degrees, quite 20 to 22 degrees quite nicely. That's what an ale yeast likes to be at. I can only brew a lager between about February, March time, because then I can stick it in the shed and it's cool enough that that's the kind of temperature that the lager yeast likes. But I still end up wrapping it in blankets. That is my temperature control.
I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
If you're really, you need to be able to keep it at a consistent fermentation temperature is the place that you need to put it at. Don't be putting it in no like airing cupboards or anything.
It's not like cellaring it.
If you've got a cellar and it keeps at a nice kind of ambient temperature, that would be a good place to put it. And you don't really want it anywhere where it's going to get a lot of light on it, things like that.
And how long would you say it was before you got? I use the word good. How long before you got good at it? But what I'll say, maybe not necessarily like good, because obviously I think you're good at what you do, but you might not have that. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that. How long before you got confident with it, really?
So I did 2 kits. I did them quite far apart because we were moving out of the flat. So I waited until we'd moved into our house to do the next one. And then we were moving again. So I didn't do another one until a while after that. But at that point, I was just like, I feel like I can just I want to make the beers that I want to make rather than what you can get in a kit. And I had been up to Wildcard for my first International Women's Collaboration Brew Day, and I was just like, and I met some people there and talked about home brewing, and I was just like, I'm gonna go for it. I'm just gonna make a beer. I'm gonna find a recipe. I'm gonna make up what I want. And I just gave it a go because I'm making 5 liters. If it comes out really bad, you can just ditch it, and it's sad, but oh well.
On that scale, yeah. if you bin it off,
And actually, it came out really well. So I don't think I've made a bit. Well, I think I did one beer.
I was gonna say, have you made anything that's undrinkable, or was everything?
It wasn't undrinkable. It just wasn't very nice. I was going for a hoppy amber ale, and I got my calculations on it was like the second recipe I think I'd ever made, and I really went for like a right, I'm gonna try and work this out myself, and I just got the calculations for the malts completely wrong, and there just wasn't enough malt in it, so it was like it came out at like 2.8% or something, and I was like, that's not what I wanted. And it was drinkable. I didn't give it to many people because I wasn't happy with it, but generally everything I've made has been drinkable, and usually it comes out the way I wanted.
So that was that, did I get that right? 2 homebrew kits.
Yeah.
And then you were confident enough to just be like, cool, I'll just make
so from there you can find, there are a plethora of recipes online, and you can just follow the recipe and work it out, make tweaks. I kind of tweak because I'm like, as someone that knows beer flavors, I know what I want it to be like. So I look at a recipe and I'm like, I think I want a bit more of this and I want a bit more of that. So I'll tweak it and go from there.
That's interesting, I guess. Is that I would imagine that's kind of just something that comes with time and experience as well, is knowing, this hop is, the more you study hops as well, that's going to give you this, and therefore you want less of that.
I'm a baker and I'm a cook, so it's very similar. Like, recipes, like you can follow a recipe to the T, and it's still not going to come out the way necessarily that you want it or that person's made it. But you've got to put your little tweaks and things on it. So that's what I do. I'll be like, right, this is what I want to make, and then I'll look at a variety of different recipes and I'll pull from what I want. And I'll take a little bit from this and a little bit from that and be like, yeah, I'm happy with that, and then go for it.
So how often do you actually do a new brew? Do you do it in a month? Always.
So my Vienna lager is the only one that I've rebrewed because I just like trying different things. So pretty much all of my recipes are something new each time. But I will go I've got a porter recipe that I like, and I'll use that as a base, and then I'll add different things in it. So I've done it as a hazelnut coffee porter.
Oh, yum.
I've done it as that one came out really well. I was really happy with that one. I've used it to make a cranberry raspberry spiced porter for Christmas.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, that one came out. I was happy with that. And then that's the base recipe that we gave to Heist.
Oh, which we'll get on to.
Yeah. So I, like, there'll be bits where I was like, okay, I like this base bit, and then I'll change bits.
Play around with the other.
Yeah, and then I play around with whatever else I add to it.
And how frequently do you do your brews? Do you do one, a week? Do you do one a month, or?
No, because the whole process. So a brew day is going to take you a minimum 4 hours, depending on what you're doing. A minimum of 4 hours. That's if your sparge is good and you've got you're just on a roll, and you don't stop to have a chat or a cup of tea or lunch. Or something goes wrong, or you've got to fiddle with something. Minimum 4 hours for the brew day. Then it's got to ferment for at least 2 weeks, sometimes 3, depending on what else is going on. Then you've got to bottle it, and then it's got to sit for 4 weeks. So you're at least going to have, I have now invested in several demijohns, so I can have several on the go at the once, but you've got to fit in that time as a hobbyist to get the brew day in, leave it to ferment somewhere. Your equipment's tied up then because you've got beer in the fermentation vessel. Then you've got to have the time to bottle it, and you don't want to leave it too long because you're risking infection, or you're risking it being sat on the yeast for too long, and then that will start to produce off flavors as the yeast dies. So you do need to kind of be in that routine. And as it, I'm not selling it, I'm just doing it for fun, so I've got to fit it in around everything else in my life.
Yeah. So you don't have that many things on the go.
Not too many things that I'm doing, but I
think you're being just really selfish.
When we were in lockdown, I did a lot more brewing than I do now because I'm busier with other things now.
Of course.
But I can have about 2 in fermentation at the time, and I feel that's manageable. It's then working in bottling it. I did bottle twice on one day, and the bottling isn't too bad. It's then the cleaning afterwards, because you've got all the trub in the demijohn, you've got all the bits from your bottling, and you want to clean that as soon as you've emptied it, because if you leave that yeast in there, it's just going to go gross. It's going to be harder to get off. Sometimes it's quite difficult in a glass demijohn because it's got a tiny little hole you've got to get into to clean it. That you need to clean it right away. And so that can take a little bit of time. And you want it completely spotless, because if you leave it, you've just got to clean it either later on when it's dried up, or the next time you go to use it, it's not ready, and then you've got to clean it up anyway, and it's going to take even longer.
Yeah, it's do it right away, or hold off and have it be more of a faff.
But then if you do 2 rounds of bottling, that's 2 demijohns you've got to scrub clean, and it can take me 20 minutes to scrub out a demijohn if it's playing ball.
Yeah, I guess that's one question that might be quite good that people wouldn't even think to ask is, so I obviously know what, I showed what a demijohn looked like on video. It's just like a jug, more or less.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this, but maybe you can sort of explain a bit more, like, how do you go about cleaning that? Because I know you've tried like numerous different techniques. You've tried the magnet situation, you've tried making your own magnet situation.
So my demijohns are quite small because they're only 5 litres. When you've got bigger ones, you can get like a vase magnet cleaner, so that it's like 2 magnets, chuck one in, and then the magnets kind of stick together, and you can kind of do a little scrub with them. I tried that. I was like, yeah, vase cleaner, that looks amazing, that'll work. Wouldn't go through the whole of the demijohn. And then I was like, right, because I've seen some in America that are different sizes. So I was like, can't get them over here. I was like, can I make my own? Found a YouTube video about how to make your own. You need some really strong magnets, and you get a sponge and you cut a little hole in it, and you stick the magnet in one, chuck that in the demijohn, put the other one next to it, do the little scrub. They were such strong magnets, it kept coming out of the sponge. So that didn't work either. I have a bottle brush, so that you can get straight bottle brushes and you can get curved bottle brushes. And the curved bottle brush goes in and then it cleans the curved side. I need a new curved bottle brush because it's like nylon bristles, and I've flattened it from scrubbing, because the curve is where the level of your beer sits. And then the yeast will generally make a ring right at that point. And then you've got to scrub that off. And so I've gradually flattened my curved bottle brush.
From the scrubbing.
I just need a new one.
Now everyone knows what to get you for Christmas. So.
And top tip, when you're pulling the bottle brush out of your demijohn, don't just go whoop and pull it straight out, because you will spray yeast everywhere. Take it very slowly out and cover it with your hand, and then you won't end up with yeast all over your face, all up the wall. Ask me how I know.
I don't want to know. You were talking about how you were sort of brewing out of the flat originally. I know there was a question that came in about like, how much space do you need to brew? What's the ideal amount, and what's kind of the smallest that you can get away with? Say you've got a really tiny galley kitchen, does that make a difference?
As long as you can fit a big soup pot on there, then that's all the space that you need. And you need you'll need a little bit of counter space to be able to sort out your demijohn for filling it over. You can do it in a really small space. It's when you start getting more into it and you decide to, add to your kit. Since I started, I've now got more pots. I've got more demijohns. I've now got
you literally have buckets.
I've got a bottling bucket. Because when I first did it, I just transferred the beer out of the demijohn into the bottles. It's actually better to transfer it out of the demijohn into a bottling bucket, and then from the bucket into the bottles, because then you're transferring less trub.
If you do that, do you have to let it sit there for a particular amount of time, or can you just bottle right away once?
Straight away. Do it straight away. You don't, because the longer you leave it open, the more chance you're oxidizing it. Yeah. So you want to get that done quickly and calmly, because the more you jostle it, the more oxygen you're adding to it. So you've got to
don't panic.
Calmly. No, do it calmly. And you also add sugar at that point, or some sort of sugar to reinvigorate the yeast to carbonate it in the bottle, unless you're going to force carbonate it, but I don't have that sort of system. I also now have a wort chiller, because once you've boiled it and added your hops, you need to cool it down to the right temperature for your yeast. You can do that just with a sink full of ice and water. Sometimes that takes forever. So I had one where it took like more than an hour to cool down. Just
That's
in the
one thing I
ice.
noticed about the brewing process is like there's a lot of waiting.
Yeah, there's a lot
There's
of waiting
like,
for it to
you
do.
had to keep the boil rolling boil
Yeah.
for an hour straight.
Yeah.
And that is like, that to me, like I knew you had to boil it and stuff like that, but the idea of the consistency of needing to keep it boiling for an hour is absolutely crazy. And then it's the like the chilling part of it when it's done. That part is like waiting around again for it to cool down, but not get too cold. So you have to like give it time, but then also check it and then realize like, no, it's not done yet. So I've got to go wait some more. And you don't want to walk away. You kind of have to stay in the vicinity of the kitchen because for both the boil and the cool down, because 3 seconds can make all the difference. There's no like, here's the exact amount of time that something's gonna, either stop boiling or potentially overboil, I guess, or with the cooling, it's gone too cold. And now it's not ideal for the yeast. You've got to heat it back up again. It's insanity.
That is not ideal. That is not an ideal condition. And I mean, in commercial processes, they will have, systems and computers and things that are
probably scream at you if it starts getting.
Yeah, they start making noises, or they're regulating it. Like you can these all-in-one systems. You can regulate the temperature, and you'll have something that will click in and out that will regulate the temperature. Like, I'm the regulator. I am it when the mash is happening. That has to be so. When you put for anyone that doesn't know what the mash is, you put your grain into hot water and you leave it for at least an hour to extract the starches and enzymes that are going to create fermentable sugars. I do that, and then you leave it for the hour, but you can't just leave it for an hour because you want to keep that temperature at around 68, 67 degrees Celsius. So every 15 minutes, I will go back and check the temperature. If it's gone down lower than I'd like, I have to turn it up a little bit. If it's somehow got warmer, you need to leave the lid off so that it can cool down a little bit, because you need that ideal temperature to create the reaction where you're extracting the starches and the enzymes. Otherwise, you're not getting what you need to make beer.
Yeah, no, that
science.
It's honestly, it was just watching this, like, just what should you go back, like, okay, we've got to check this. Okay, watching the cool
smart
down
speaker is the best thing, because you
were like set an alarm for 15 minutes, set an alarm for 30 minutes, set an alarm for 45 minutes, and it's just, I don't think
looking
that's
at
something...
me like I'm a nutter, but I'm like, no.
I don't. What you need. I think that's something that maybe people don't appreciate. Like, you can hear about it, but you don't necessarily appreciate it until you see it firsthand. And I think maybe, the difference of having an all-in-one, it doesn't make it any less creative or amazing, but I think there is something that maybe makes you feel like really accomplished, in the sense of like, you waited around watching it boil for an hour straight, and then
the beer that we brewed only had one hop addition. So if you're doing multiple hop additions, if you've got to put it in at the beginning of the boil, you've got to put some in the middle, you're going to put more towards the end. If you're adding other ingredients that need to be in at different times, if you're going to put a fining in, that has to go in at a certain time. So you're going to have like multiple points where you're like, okay, now I need to chuck this in. Okay, now it's the time to chuck that in. Because if you don't put it in at the right time, it's not going to extract what you need.
And I think it's worth noting as well, like, when you put stuff in, that can potentially, depending on what you're putting it in and how much you're putting in, that can change like temperature for you, like the temperature as well. So you have to let it boil straight for an hour. However, if you're putting certain things in, that could sort of risk the boil maybe not being a rolling boil. And it's so much exactness. Like, you were like, the temperature needs to be exactly blah 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 point something, and it was like so oddly specific that I think it just made us both laugh, because we were like, that is oddly specific, that temperature that we needed to get.
And now one of the other things that I've invested in now is a hop spider. So that's basically
I don't know the name of it, but it's cool.
It's a mesh tube that hangs over your pot, and you put your hops in it rather than into the pot itself. You can just put them into the pot itself. I was doing that, but I originally started with whole leaf hops. Now they are a lot easier to clean out of the bottom of your pot once you've taken the wort out, because they're chunkier and easier to get rid of when they're wet. most hops nowadays tend to come in pellet form. And when that hits the water, it just disintegrates. So you would end up with this mushy green mess in the bottom of your pot. But with a hop spider, the mushy green mess stays in the tube, and then you just clean that out rather than it being stuck to the bottom of your pot.
Top tip.
Get a hop spider.
So you get out your bajillion boxes, your bajillion plastic boxes. Feels like a bajillion plastic boxes. Honestly, it was so funny because you like pulled out a box and it was like, here's all the demijohns, like here's the ingredients and all that. So you take that stuff out. So everything's ready. It's all set up, ready to go. What does kind of an average brew day look like from a high level view, regardless of what you're actually brewing? What's kind of the high level view of what your average brew day looks like?
So I usually start by filling my pots with water and getting those on to start heating up. The mash tun one you want to get heated up because you want to get that to 72 degrees Celsius, I think is what I get it to. While that is doing, I then weigh out my grains. You then want to add the grains to the water.
Top tip, get a big enough bowl, because I watched as bowl. You very quickly I think people underestimate how much. I know I would underestimate how many grains you need in a grain recipe, an all grain recipe. You were getting close to the top of the bowl.
really big bowl for weighing those out. If you haven't got a kit that's just weighed it out for you. So that the recipe that Tori and I did needed 1.3 kilograms of grain, and that's quite a lot of grain. That's only going to come out around 5-6%. So if you're doing, a higher ABV beer, you're going to have more grain because that's where your sugar comes from to create alcohol. So you can end up with a lot of grain.
I think that's the thing is I didn't really appreciate as well, like how much ingredients were involved in a single brew. Like when it's not happening in front of your face, like someone can tell you the amount and you can read, here's 5 different types of malts and grains going into it. But like, until you see it in a quite hefty sized bowl and that's being filled up, you just don't appreciate like how much really is going into it.
Yeah. I mean, I have between 500 to 800 grams of base malt and then whatever else you need into it for your various flavors. So that goes into the heated water, stick a lid on it, check it every 15 minutes because generally your mash is going to be an hour. Check your recipe because it
set your smart timer for every 15-minute intervals.
For every 15-minute intervals so that you can check the temperature. When you put those grains in, you're going to need a sanitized big spoon or a mash paddle because you don't want any lumps. So you want that because you want all the water to get into all of those grains. And the grains that I buy are already crushed. So you need to crush the grains for the water to be able to get in there and extract the starches and sugars. If you can crush them yourself. So some people have a mill, they attach a drill to it to make it work. Some people do that. I don't have that. So that may be an additional step. Or just buy crushed malt.
But what I learned was you don't want them almost too fine because you did this like technique of doing like a shaky of the bag because there were bits that were too fine and you were like a dust. You can use them, however that's how you get a stuck mash.
because that's quite powdery, when it gets wet it's going to get mushy, and then when you are trying to extract the water from the grains it's just going to coat the inside of your sieve and then you got to scrape it off to be able to get your water out.
And then you risk flicking things everywhere.
So mash is on. While the mash is doing, I weigh out my hops. Most of my hops live in the freezer, so and I only need a tiny little amount, so I weigh those out, get them ready, and any other additions that I'm going to add, spices, peels. I use Protoflock sometimes as a fining. It's from Irish moss, so it's not made from fish swim bladder, which I don't want to put in my beer.
Still vegan.
Not vegan. So I'll get those ready. Once the mash is done, you're then going to sparge. And at 30 minutes of the mash, I then heat up my sparge water in my other pot. Once you finish your mash, you've got to mash out. So you've got to stir it for 7 minutes, because then that stops the process of creating the fermentable sugars. You're then going to remove the grains from the water, which is called sparging. And so you're going to remove the first runnings. So that's like the water that the grains were sat in. And then you're going to rinse those grains with more water that you heated up to come to your full amount of wort. So the water is now called wort because it's got the sugars in it. It'll be whatever colour you want your beer to be from the grains. Once you've extracted your wort, that could take anything from 20 minutes to an hour.
Ours definitely took an hour.
Ours took an hour. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because when you did the like mash now, I was like, I can help you stir if you want. And you were like, no. You're like, you're going to be sparging.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think my problem, one of the observations that I made of this about myself anyways, was I get very like OCD with it. And I was like, I need to get all of the water out, which
You're gonna spill some.
We had the best bit is as well, was like, we actually ended up with slightly too much water. Yeah. So I was there trying to like get it all out every single time. Like I would do the lift the sieve up and get all the water out. And it was like, the sound was like someone that was weeing. This is like the only way I can describe it. And it was like when you need a wee so bad and it's so long.
Don't
and then you think you're done.
You need a wee.
And then you think you're done and you hear it slowly drip. And then you kind of move the sieve a bit and it's like, no, we're still going. We're still going.
Yeah, there's a bit more.
Yeah. And then it ended up taking us an hour. But I imagine if I hadn't been so, we probably could have done it quicker if I hadn't been so OCD about being like, I need all the water out.
My best one has been 20 minutes, and that was a lower ABV beer because as well, like all the grains are just sat in the sieve. You don't want to, like, being careful that you don't tip any out, and so you are being more careful. If you've got less grains, it kind of sits nicer in the sieve. And so I
wanted to be thorough. Where it was my first time, I was like, I want to be thorough, I want it to be good, and then it took an hour. So
then you've got your wort, you're going to boil it, you've got to bring it to the boil, which can take a little bit of time. You're then going to do and you've got to watch it when it starts to get to the boil, because that is just stickiness. If that overboils, you're going to have just a sticky mess all over your kitchen that you then need to clean up, and it is like, it'll be caramelized because it's just sugar and water,
which I didn't really think about until we were doing the
you're
sparge.
like, this is really sticky.
Well, we were doing the sparge and I was kind of like grabbing, like I went to go put a pan down and I went to kind of just like move it out the way a bit, and some had kind of got over the side and I was like, oh, it really is quite sticky.
Because it's full of sugar. So then once that's at the boil, you add your additions of hops, peels, spices, blah, 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 whatever you're adding. A general boil is about an hour, but check your recipe because it could be an hour and a half, it could be longer. This is a very basic brewing run. I mean, you could get into decoction mashing where you're taking bits out and that takes even longer, and boiling it and then adding it back in. There are more steps that you could add to this.
Yeah, there was like the idea of you could do a whirlpool, and you're like, well, I don't have like a whirlpool, but you were saying people actually like make a way to do a whirlpool.
Yeah, so they will. So with a whirlpool, it cools the beer, but it also helps to filter it because it brings all of the trub to the middle and to the bottom. So people will have a drill with a spoon attached to it and they will whirlpool it, or you just stir really, 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 really fast.
so top tip for anyone that wants to do a recipe that requires whirlpooling and you want to actually attempt to whirlpool it and you're creative, get a drill situation sorted out
with a drill bit. So then once you finish that point, you've then got to cool it down to the appropriate temperature for your yeast. Your yeast will generally say on the packet, or the recipe might tell you. I do that in an ice bath. So I always set an alarm for 15 minutes before the end of the boil, because at that point I will make an ice bath in my sink. I cheat and buy bags of ice because I cannot make enough ice to make a significant difference to the chill.
There's nothing wrong with that though,
fridge.
Because I think that's a good tip, because a lot of people won't have the situation, like they won't be in a situation where they can make enough.
Chuck it in the sink with cold water. It will help you chill. I also have a wort chiller, as I said, which is a big coil of copper that attaches to my tap, so I can just run hot water through that as well. That has brought my chilling time down to around 15-20 minutes, which is amazing. because you want to chill it as quickly as possible, because the more it's sat there, the more you've got a chance of infection. So I will make the ice bath at 15 minutes to go towards the end of the boil. I will also start my yeast. So I keep my yeast in the fridge. There is a chunk of the regular food fridge that just has my packets of yeast in it. I will add it. I use about half of kind of a regular packet for each of my brews. I will add a little bit of warm water to it and then stir it up and leave it to sit. And that will start to foam up. And at that point, I also sanitize the demijohn, the funnel for adding it, the sieve, the extra sieve that I use to pass it through. What else do I use at that point? The airlock. You need to put sanitizer in the airlock, and the bung, and my sampling tube and my hydrometer, so that I can take a sample of the beer at the end, or the wort at the end, see how much sugar is in it before the yeast starts working, because that's your original gravity. You'll then take your final gravity before you bottle, and there's a calculation you can do. I do it in an app where it will determine what ABV your beer will come out at. So you chill your wort, then you're going to transfer that into the demijohn. I use a funnel and a sieve so that anything else that's left in the beer, you're going to have protein. You're going to have hot break from where it's boiled. Like, when you boil potatoes and there's like that white bubbly stuff, that's a hot break, and it's the proteins and stuff from the boil. So there'll be some of that in the beer, and you don't really want that in there. So you sieve it again as it goes through, but that can be a normal kitchen-sized sieve. Put that into the demijohn. Then I add my yeast, and then you aerate it. Now at this point, so you put it into the demijohn, and then you need to add your yeast. At this point, you need to aerate it. So this is the only time that you want to actually get oxygen into the beer, because you want to give enough oxygen for the yeast to be able to do its thing. So you aerate it, and then you put the bung in.
Swingy.
Just swirl it around. I usually do it for a 60 count. And then I put the bung in with the airlock. Make sure that's nice and tight in there, and then it's done. You want to sit it in a quiet corner and don't touch it. And then, of course, after that, leave that for 2 weeks. After that, at some point in that period, like after about a week, you might want to dry hop with hops or peel or anything else that you might want to add fruit.
Which is key to leave space, because I know that sort of we were doing the measurements. You were like, actually, we're not going to use all this because I need to leave about X amount of space.
Yeah.
Like roughly, what type of size gap from the top do you think you need to leave if you're doing, dry hopping?
2 fingers.
Solid.
Very precise.
Solid,
I mean, it depends on how much you're going to put in it, but you got to remember that if you add anything sugary, like fruit or something like that, the yeast is suddenly going to go wild again, and it might out of the top. It still could, if you've got a very sugary wort, it could still go a bit mad.
Oh, like the donut one did?
Yeah, our donut one was very full of sugar, and it went absolutely mad. And it will, like, I will come down the next morning and there's just yeast coming out of the airlock. You can clean the airlock and pop it back on again. So top tip, I make up sanitizer in a washing up bowl for brew day. I will then keep like a tub of that aside until I bottle, because you might need to redo your airlock, and that you don't want to have to make up a whole bowl of sanitizer again. You can just use a bit of sanitizer from there. You might have to magically make a blow off tube because
you had to do that one.
Yes, I had to MacGyver a blow off tube because the little airlock that I had was not man enough for it. So instead, in the bung went a plastic tube that then went into a pot of sanitizer, and then it bubbles off that way. But because the tube is going into the sanitizer, there's no way of oxygen or whatever getting into the beer, but it can still merrily work away. And if a little bit of yeast pops out, it just goes down the tube and into the sanitizer, so it's fine.
Craziness. Yeah, I remember people, if they follow your Instagram, probably saw you posted it. It was really funny. You were like, I just woke up and it was going crazy.
I did take videos of it, so at some point I will do a reel about MacGyvering a blow off tube. And I also took I took a little bit of video of a very similar contraption at Heist, so we'll compare the commercial to the homebrew at some point.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, and I think there was for anyone that doesn't know, because obviously we've mentioned like the sanitizing aspect. I know there was like what I learned from you was there was like 2 main types of sanitizer, and every time we said we said sanitize like so many times that I've just got to mention it here, and I said it to you on the day. It makes me think of that episode of Doctor Who when you have that I forget her name, but she's like
piece of skin.
Yeah, she's like the piece of skin, and she's always going like, moisturize me. And so every time you like sanitize, I just want to go sanitize me, because it just felt like, I don't remember her name, but it was hilarious because she was the moisturize me lady. And I felt like we just used that phrase so much that it became like that. So with the sanitizer, you had the one, if I remember correctly, that was sort of the rinse off.
Yeah, so I've got a rinse one that I found that I like. You can get no rinse, which means that you can literally dip it in it and then just use it. I've got a rinse one. That's just one that I found that I like. So you can either or.
And the way you want to do it, really, I guess, is you want to have like a washing up bowl type.
Yeah, you want
thing
like
filled,
because you've got like, I sanitized the entire demijohn, so you had to fill it, the whole thing, with sanitizer and swirl it around and let it sit for a second before you rinse it out. And everything needs to go in there. The spoon went in there multiple times. The thermometer went in there multiple times as it was in and out of the beer. There are many things that need to be sanitized.
So that's it. And you want to keep in mind as well, like the size of what it is. Like the thermometer is quite long. The spoon can be quite long, especially if you've got the paddle. So you don't want to get like a tiny, I guess the one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to get a tiny little bowl made up of sanitizer. Yeah. Because you're going to find, I guess you'd probably find that quite challenging to get some of the things you need to sanitize fully sanitized.
And I keep this tub. I said I keep a tub of sanitizer. Like it's quite a tall. Like I get quite a tall Tupperware one with a screw top on it usually, like almost like a tall jar, something that you might keep soup in if you're going to freeze it, something like that.
But don't confuse it with soup.
No, don't. Well, I mean, it's cloudy water, so hopefully you wouldn't. But then I can like dip things in it if I need to. So you need it to be quite a nice depth. To get things in. I mean, at that point, when you are taking, like when I've kept that aside for like dry hopping and things, you're not going to be using the thermometer, so you won't need it to be that tall. But I have done it where I've kind of decanted it into a bowl over something and then put it back into the tub. Like you've got to think about these things, because you've got to get the sanitizer all over whatever the thing is that you're using.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's why I think it's worth calling that out, because some people just might not, if it's your first time, again, that's something that you just might not think about. And speaking of like the first time, so obviously for me, it was my first experience brewing, full stop. We chose to brew a Brave Noise.
We did.
We had a few different things. We were going to try to brew 2, but it just became so challenging that we peeled it back. And then for obvious reasons, we picked a Brave Noise. So we've done the homebrew recipe of that. There were some tweaks to that because we didn't necessarily have everything to our disposal that we needed ingredients wise, but we've made some tweaks. You've made tweaks accordingly to what would work well. Really excited to see kind of how that's going to turn out when we get there. Really
I need to dry hop it.
I
haven't dry hopped it yet, so I need to dry hop it and then it will be bottled.
Oh, I want to see pics when you dry hop it. It feels like that's just like the baby that we just made together.
Stories.
I just thought before we move on, before we get another drink and we go on to sort of the Q&A section of things, I thought as it being my first experience, I would highlight kind of some of the things that I found interesting that I didn't really know about, didn't appreciate fully maybe. The first one being, I kind of didn't realize how much time it was going to take us. Like, I know you said 4 hours.
I was like, it's going to take a good 4 hours. And you were like, can we squeeze another one in? I was like, no, mate, you're going to be knackered.
Yeah,
no, we can do 2.
I just didn't think about it. And I think because it's the fact of like, there is a lot of, what I didn't know at the time was just how much, but because I knew like a lot of it was kind of sitting and waiting and doing stuff, like it didn't feel like, it felt like it wasn't going to be as long. Like I knew it would be a few hours, but what I didn't factor in was the like getting everything out, getting it set up, and then the cleaning aspect. So we started at 9:15 in the morning, and we didn't finish the brewing process until about just after 2 maybe. And then we still had to clean up. And to be fair, like our cleanup was very light compared to what it probably normally is.
Brew day is my favorite cleanup day because most of the brew day stuff goes in the dishwasher.
So whereas, we got off light.
Right. So whereas usually bottling day, the demijohn can't go in the dishwasher because it's a tiny hole and then a big space, the dishwasher's not going to get to it. So you've got to hand wash that. There are certain things that you've got to hand wash, like my glass thermometer is not going anywhere near a dishwasher. My glass hydrometer is not going anywhere near that. Certain things are too big or they're plastic and I don't want them to melt. So brew day is better because it's a lot of pots and pans that can just go in the dishwasher.
But even still, I mean, like with that, the minimum cleanup we did,
there was still
we were still done
tidying things away, and
say 9:15 in the morning, and then we were ready to go out about 2:30, 3 o'clock-ish. So it was, I mean, you said like 4 hours, like it was pretty long. Again, like our sparge was fairly long. I knew it would be a few hours, but I just didn't realize like how I didn't factor in the cleanup and breakdown part of it as well. And it's just like, you don't just get to come in and be like, I'm brewing something and now I'm done. Like you do have to factor that in.
And it's like you're done. Oh, I've done the sparge now. Now we can go on to the next bit. It's going to boil for an hour. You got to get it to boil first.
It's those little boil. It's those little bits. But the good part that I thought that came from that like hour-long boil of getting it up there, what was good was that kind of gave us the opportunity to eat lunch. We had my Duchess, because obviously I've said I've never tried the Duchess before.
Is usually lunch break time.
We had a lovely Duchess and cheese filled lunch. I did not. I had numerous cheddars, all the hard cheeses, and some nice Italian meats. So that was good. Was nice. It was a nice like continental Europe lunch. I really loved it. But yes, I mean that was it. And I kind of also hadn't realized like how much gear you in particular had, because I know you can get away with like bare minimum, but like just looking at the boxes, like looking at how much, because of how you brew, and you don't kind of brew out of the boxes, you do your own thing. You have like a box that's filled with just ingredients, which smelled lovely. Like I mean, it smelled great the whole time, like cereally lovely smells while we were brewing. But even when you just first lifted the box off,
but you're like, is someone making coffee? And I'm like, no, that's the malts.
I was like, oh, it's really like chocolatey and like really like roasty. I was like, it smells amazing. And you were like, I've opened the box with the malts, and I was like, that was beautiful. Like it was just such an appealing smell. But I just kind of hadn't realized how much kit I think that you had acquired, and that's probably something that as you brew, you realize this is going to be helpful to me, so I'll get this extra piece of kit.
And that is the thing with doing your own recipes and doing all grain, you are going to end up with lots of bags of grain. Depending on what you brew. If you brew the same thing over and over, then you'll be fine. But I've tried lots of different things, so I've got a lot of different hops because I only use a little bit of hops generally, so then I have it in the freezer to be able to use again. I've got the bags of malts in a sealed box ready to use again. Like they can last a very long time. So you end up with a lot of stuff. I've got varying different types of yeast because I've made different beer styles.
Yeah, and I think also like another thing that sort of popped out to me was like how much of an art form it was to see you keeping temperatures at such specific ranges, and you were doing it all with like just a standard like thermometer.
I need to get a digital thermometer really.
I was going to say that kind of brought me on to like my next question, which is like, is there anything that you can recommend for how people can get this accuracy so well? Because it honestly was so impressive to be like, you'd check it and you'd be like, no, it's still fine. And I was like, I don't understand how you're just like, it's ending up so well. Is there any type of thermometer you'd recommend? Or I
mean, I've just got a regular thermometer, but a digital thermometer would be better. I'm also thinking of investing in a digital spoon where like spoon weighs and it tells you in a little digital scale, because I've got my kitchen scale that I do it on, but the amount of hops I use, sometimes it's only like 3 grams.
That's so timely that you said that, because
no yes
It's timely you said that, because the next point that I had written down
Yeah.
was like how much attention to detail you needed to pay to the grain measurements.
Yeah.
And that was really funny, because it was like you were using it on like a digital scale, and there was like the bowl there, and you were putting it all out, and then you'd be like, yeah, okay, it's good, and then you need like 0.1 left, right. And then like slightly more would fall out, and then you'd be like, no, and then you'd have to like
get the spoon,
scoop it back up again.
And it's a couple of grams over, I don't worry. If I've overshot by a bit, I'm like, I'm gonna have to take that out, because the different flavors from the different grains can make a difference. So you do want to be pretty accurate on that. But a couple of grains at my level, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference.
Which actually then I feel like I am getting to be like a genius of organizing my thoughts, because it takes me on to my next point as well, which was sort of a reminder to people that are trying homebrewing and maybe are not as experienced as you are, may not know this. Obviously, you've said you've used an app and everything. If you have to make a change on the fly, definitely record that change on the app. Because I think when we did the measurements, there was something that we had to use a bit of a different grain or something like that.
I didn't have enough Pilsner malt.
So we had to use a different.
I've not got enough Pilsner malt, so I'm going to use Marisotta instead. So I use an app called Brewer's Friend. There are different ones that you can use. And I just went in there, and you can pick out the different grains and say how much you're using, and then it will calculate for you your estimated ABV, your estimated color range, and your estimated original gravity and final gravity, like your estimated IBUs and all of that. So that's really useful, because you can kind of aim for those things. I've often sat there and like I'm working out a recipe, and I'll add a bit, and I'll be like, that's not the color I want. Add a bit more, add a bit more, add a bit. There we go. So I find it really useful, and it's got a calculator to I put in the original gravity and the final gravity, and it tells me, I don't have to work it out, it just tells me what my ABV is. So it's really useful, and it can go in quite detailed as you go. Like you can put in the efficiency of your brew house and wow. your water information and all of that. I don't go into that much detail, but yeah, my Brewer's Friend app is very useful.
But yeah, that's very important.
Make the changes
down
and
what you're
doing.
Make the changes. Make the changes when you're doing it, because you don't want to risk forgetting it, and then you might forget what you've changed or the measurements that you've changed, and then like you're just not going to be able to have that accurate calculation.
And when you're adding other ingredients, like I record, like if I've added a flavoring, how many drops of that flavoring I've added, how many spoons of this spice I added.
You want to be able to say,
you want to be able to make
this
it again.
Gave me the specific exact amount that I
take
wanted.
Those notes and take a note of your original gravity, and make sure you put in your final gravity, and anything that you did that's different than usual. There's a note section.
Journal.
Right, and I do have
just get a brewer's journal. Get an actual brewer's journal.
I do have a brewer's journal as well that I write things in. So
just use I feel like a combination there could be like really
helpful.
That's
what I do. So I've got a paper journal that I write things in, and I've got my app, and I use a bit of both.
I mean, I feel like I can summarize that. Measurements are stressful.
Yeah.
Measurements are stressful, and make sure you capture them appropriately.
Yeah.
Moving on, you mentioned obviously you stored your hops in the freezer. One thing that I found particularly interesting was when they came out of the freezer, they weren't particularly cold. Like it didn't feel, I know that some people are probably gonna be like, oh, obviously they weren't cold. Like I'm sure that people are gonna call me stupid for that. But just when you're like, it's in the freezer, my thought was like, oh, maybe it will start getting a little bit frosty if it's been in there.
Imagining they were in like chunks of ice.
Not so much that, but it's like, even when I put anything I put in the freezer, feel like if you put it too close to the back or the side or something, like sometimes it could just get a bit of like a frost over. No, but even when I have stuff in tubs, it can get a bit of a frost over on it.
But they haven't got a lot of liquid content.
Well, that's it. As you pointed out to me on the day, you were like, yeah, it's fairly leafy. And I thought, yeah, well, I guess if you put like, because this was your leaf ones, your dried leaves.
Yeah.
I guess, if I put a dried leaf in the fridge, it probably wouldn't freeze. But I don't know what I was thinking, but I guess I expected it to feel a bit more cold. And it just didn't. It felt like normal. And I guess, as you pointed out as well, it's probably quite a good thing, because when you were adding it to the boil, you weren't adding enough of or too cold of a temperature that it was really causing like an impact to it. Whereas I guess if you were brewing on a much larger scale, you maybe would have to worry about that a bit more potentially.
I have found, so adding whole leaf isn't such a problem, but when you add the pellets, if you just like chuck them in, it will have a tendency to overboil. I had that once. I was like, oh, don't do that. Don't do that again. But when I put it in the hop spider, it's better because it's more concentrated in an area. But before I had my hop spider, I was just kind of chucking pellets in. I'd used whole leaf, I could just chuck them in, it was fine. But when I put the pellets in, as they disintegrate, it made it fizz up a bit, and I nearly had a boil over. So be careful when you're adding your hops. Add them carefully. Don't just chuck them in, because you might have a boil over.
Oh no, I feel like that's just screams mess to me. Mess that you don't want to clean.
No.
And then I think I've pretty much mentioned everything else already, but the last thing that I don't remember if I necessarily said it or not, but it was the leaving the space of the demijohn for the dry hopping. Obviously you use like a bag that's sort of like, I would call it like a cheesecloth, but it's not. The
one that I've got is more nylon-y. I got them from Lakelands, and they are jam bags. So when you're doing your jam, you put it like they're elasticated at the top, and it goes in the jar, and you put it over the top, and then it strains off anything, like you end up with just jam in it. You can get ones that actually sit like a drawstring or stuff like that. I found these ones work quite well. I put hops in them, I put peel in them. I generally puree in my fruit and put that straight into the beer. I don't put it in the bag. Top tip, if you're going to add peel, cut it thinly.
Well, I can imagine because the hole on the top of it is maybe
if
not.
you have big fat bits of peel, it's really difficult to get the bag back out of the tiny hole again. So cut them up a bit thinly if you're going to have a lot of peel. Something that I learned at the beginning of this year when I was making the mustard beer. Hops usually okay. Hops will colour the bag, so you're going to need to give that a really good wash afterwards. And I just wash it in like washing up liquid and water, because you don't want to have anything in there that when the next time you put it in the beer, it's going to add flavour. So you want something quite neutral to clean it. Sometimes I just even rinse it and just sanitize it. And you do want to sanitize that bag before you put it in.
Sanitize me.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do. You want to know what's quite interesting, Jo?
What?
You just said you use that for your mustard beer.
Yeah.
Guess what my next beer is?
The mustard beer.
That's going to be my next beer.
Ooh.
Which I'm going to go pour now, because that was the end of my enlightening first experience session.
We've got so much good content on homebrewing that we're going to have to split this into 2. See you next week for part 2.